when David sent me this image of my sermon, first thing I thought, why is Don driving? And why am I in the back seat? Secondly, is God Chinese? Because if God was Chinese, in him feeding the 5,000, it would have been dim sum, and everyone bring home leftovers. If God was Chinese, he would say, honor your father and mother, but always call them every day, okay? Yeah, so hopefully I don't get disciplined by my denomination for making God look Chinese. But God's created in our image, right? But I thank David for this image. It's nice. Thank you, David. So I've talked many times in my sermon in the past that the last 3 years have been a very, very interesting time. And within this short period of 3 years, I've experienced so much. And you know what? It felt like I was drinking out of a fire hydrant. But trying to comprehend what is the meaning behind all these things in the last 3 years. And in the middle of these 3 years, I think God was gently showing me places that my walk was sort of going off course. But also things that I wasn't really understanding. Last Sunday, Don talked about how he and Diana were navigating change. And in general, I think all of us have experienced change. Change because of the pandemic. And if you even look at our worship space, this is change. If it wasn't for the pandemic, this worship space will be very, very different. Because for those who came a little bit later, we did a major renovation of our worship space. Actually, this used to be a library, actually a multi-purpose area. There'll be bookshelves, and it didn't feel like a worship space. But in 2023, we did a major renovation. And this renovation was because of change, and we navigated that change. But even before this big change, there was a really big change in my life. And this happened way before the pandemic. And at that time, if you didn't know, I used to teach English to new immigrants and refugees for 18 years before I became a pastor. And at that time, my life was extremely carefree. There wasn't a lot of worry in my life, and I have a BMW at home, a beautiful, marvelous wife, and I didn't have much worry. Everything was going smoothly. Basically, I would wake up and I would go to class, and I'll teach 2 classes, and I'd go home at 3, and then I would basically veg at home because I always do my prep very early, so I can always relax, go home and just relax, and then the cycle, continues, right? But the moment I entered seminary and then became a pastor, things took a really interesting turn. Emotions. Emotions in general are a gift from God. Emotions are a gift from God, and they play very powerful roles in our lives. And when we look at emotions, they bring us joy, they bring us peace. There's kindness and goodness, to others. That's our emotions. We do that, right? But on the other hand, emotions also can be harsh, hurtful, and destructive. And as the life goes up and down, we need to remember that God gave us emotions so we can enjoy life and share our hearts with others. But the challenge is when we let our emotions control us. And instead of learning from these emotions, we try to control them, and we say, God, I'm in control. And we don't use God's wisdom in our emotions. And of all the emotions that we all deal with, one of the emotions that's very common that we basically deal with almost every day or almost every week for some of you is anxiety. And anxiety basically became a big part of my life when I entered ministry and when I started my theological education. But I want to say that before I talk about my experience with anxiety is good. It serves us well. It can sharpen our focus. It keeps us alert and even helps us when we recognize danger. Actually, anxiety tells us, you know what, this could be dangerous. But when anxiety becomes constant, heavy, uncontrollable, it doesn't help us. It weighs us down. Instead of guiding us, it overwhelms us. And I was overwhelmed with anxiety for the longest time. And sometimes my anxiety even stopped me in my tracks. As I said, before I entered ministry and before I started my theological education, I dealt with anxiety. We all deal with anxiety, the basic stuff. But it wasn't to that extreme. So it started with my first day in seminary, my first class. And then I sat there was 18 of us, and we give our introductions. And then one person says, my name is blah, blah, and I'm a pastor of this and that. And they go, my name is this, I'm a pastor of this. And then another person says, my name is this, and I'm a missionary, and I do this, and I do that. And then another person says, you know what, I'm this, and I've been a Christ follower for almost 30, 40 years, and I'm excited. I'm retired now. I want to go in and have time to spend more time with God and all that stuff. Then my turn. Yes, hi, I'm Bill. I'm an ESL teacher. This is my first seminary class. I've never went to Bible college. I've only been a Christian for, let's say, around 8 or 9 years, and I know nothing about the Bible. And I said that I know nothing about the Bible. Right? But that was that time when the seed of anxiety started to grow in me. And I felt like Daniel's son from Karate Kid. I was like, I'm this new kid in town, I don't know all the moves. I don't have the strength. And I'm clearly outmatched everyone in class. And I couldn't be doing this in seminary, okay? Okay, do the crane, all right? Because everyone had more Bible knowledge than me. Everyone had more experience. Everyone became a Christ follower longer than me. So I'm Daniel's son there. I feel small. I feel intimidated. And I was very much out of place. And that's when the anxiety started. How can I compete? All these people have so much experience. They know the Bible far better than me, okay? I never attended Awana. I can't quote scripture. I try to memorize scripture, but it doesn't click for me. And I'm sorry I have to admit this, but I tried to, but I remember the contents, but there are verses I remember, but I was very intimidated. And I remember, but the first paper I handed in, I was like, I said to Wendy, I can't do this. This is difficult. Don't forget, I have absolutely no theological training. I have a Bible college degree, whatever. I have applied linguistics degree. Yes, I could study Greek and Hebrew, but that has nothing to do with it, right? So I was filled with anxiety, handing my first paper. And one of the things during my graduation, my prof said to me was, you know what, of all the students I've ever had, I've never seen anyone like you who hand in paper at 11:58 p.m. You must have a really good internet because I've never seen anyone do that. Because what happens is our papers have to be submitted by midnight, and I always get under the wire. Because I couldn't write papers. I don't know why. I don't have the wisdom. And I remember my second class that I took. And this is another story. Later I find out that my seminary needed students to fill up this class. So my advisor said, Bill, we're going to put you in advanced systematic theology class. I was like, And I said, but I've only taken one course. That's a third-year course. And I remember the advisor says, oh, don't worry, God will provide. God will give you the wisdom. So I get in that class, and that was the lowest mark in seminary. I got a C+ in the master's level. And it didn't help my anxiety. But somehow I graduated. I graduated seminary after 5 years of plowing through, sort of maybe faking it till I make it with God's grace. I graduated with an MDiv. And to my shock, during my graduation, and I'm not bragging, I'm just telling you what happened, I got the highest mark in New Testament studies in my graduation class. And I was scratching my head, like, my name is Bill Chan. Just make sure, I don't want you to figure, make sure that the name is right. And then my prof says, no, you know what? I really value because you came with a child's eyes. You ask questions that other people did not think of because they've been a Christian for a long time. And then I was like, okay, great. But you know what? It didn't help my anxiety. I still had anxiety that I was inferior. I was intimidated. But even all through those seminary years, I was still feeling anxiety because I'd given up my full-time job, and before I became a pastor, as a teacher, the living was comfortable, and when I didn't worry about finances, but all through seminary, I quit my full-time job, so I lived on Winnie's salary, but the churches that I served at still paid me. But we're living in Vancouver. Like, come on, okay? It wasn't enough. And I was, when I was preparing my sermon, I was just curious. I calculated my salary of how much the churches were paying for being a part-time pastor, and it worked out to 3% of what I was paid as a teacher. And again, please don't misunderstand. I'm not complaining. God really did provide. And that was another layer. And then another layer came in. I was 2 years in the seminary, and then I, the job was great, and I was thinking, okay, what's going on? Like, what we're gonna do? Like, money's a bit tight. And then Winnie sends me a picture saying that of a popsicle stick with 2 lines. I was like, hey, great, you ate popsicle at work. That's great. Why are you showing me? He goes, no, don't you get it? So I became a dad. And then that's another layer of worry that I was dealing with. And your mileage may vary about anxiety, but we cannot deny that we live in a very anxious and uncertain time. And as that uncertainty is what is the heart of anxiety. And I reflect on it, like we feel nervous. It's often because we're not sure. And I was unsure about a lot of things. And my anxiety was brewing. The future. And that's a natural response. And sometimes these things are very depressing. And it'll make us all feel unsettled. And that's anxiety, So I entered seminary in 2012, and today is 2025. That's how long I've been dealing with anxiety. And that's a long time. That's a very long time to constantly be redlining with anxiety. And people say, no, like small things would really upset me. To be honest, like a lot of things I would really get overwhelmed. And people say, Bill, chill, relax, just relax. But you have to understand is, if you've been dealing with anxiety for such a long time, I felt like I was like someone with a compromised immune system. And if someone with a compromised immune system, you'll feel overwhelmed. It's like if someone has a compromised immune system, even a small cold can be deadly. Just imagine that. If your immune system is compromised and someone sneezes on you, the other person who sneezed might just get over that cold. But because you have a compromised immune system, it will affect you. It will put you you'll be bedridden for a long time, or even you'll be in the ICU. So that's what I was felt. But also when I was dealing with anxiety, it really changed my thinking. Wrong pattern of thinking. And I failed to trust God. And this is shocking. As a pastor, what? You failed to trust God? Yes, I failed to trust God. And this is what we'll be exploring today. And for the longest time on the road of life, I was telling God, hey, you're driving too slow. You missed a turn. You need to stop here. You need to drive here. You change lane. Do this, do that. And then I also think of my anxiety. And my anxiety rised up when something I didn't even was able to recognize. And I felt anxiety even when I even don't know why I felt anxiety. And that was what God spoke to me during the last 3 years. You know, there were times when I sensed God was speaking to me, trying to show me something, but yet I couldn't understand what God was showing me. The harder I tried to figure it out, His will, the more confused I became. Reconciling. And for those 3 years in my life, it was uncertain, and I felt anxious, praying, Lord, God, like, what are you trying to tell me? What are you trying to show me? I didn't know where you're going, and I was waiting. Life was uncertain. But the real issue is how we handle our anxieties and how long we let them take root in our hearts. And that's what I want to share with this morning. And learning to bring them under control is essential if we want to live the life that God has called each of us to do. A life of trusting Him. So verse 31 starts with therefore. Well, therefore in ESV, but for this time, I want to use the Message version. We don't use it a lot in our services, but I felt that the Message captured the essence of what God revealed to me through those 3 years of hardship. You know, and I read verse 31 in the Message, and I felt God was saying, what I'm trying to do here, Bill, is to get you to relax, not to be preoccupied with getting, so you can respond to my giving. So just to give you context, Jesus is pulling together everything that He was teaching in verses 25 to 30. He points back to God's generous care, and He calls us to live differently to those who don't know Him. And God tells His followers not to worry about food and not worry about drinks or clothing, because life is more than what we eat or wear. And then Jesus talks about the birds in the air, which do not plant or harvest, and yet God feeds them. Reminding us that God is care for the birds, and He'll surely care for each of us. And then Jesus goes on to talk about, about what worry is, and worrying achieves nothing. It cannot even add a single day. Then He turns to talk about the fields in the field, which do not work or spin, yet clothed with beauty greater than King Solomon's. And then Jesus asks, if God clothes the grass, which is here today and gone tomorrow, how much more would He clothe His people, us? So because God provides, we don't need to be trapped by the same worries that weighs others down. And if you look at that's the essence of our dread and our apprehension, our uncertainty, is the fear of not being in control. We're not being in control. And when something lies beyond our control, we don't know what to do, and that's why anxiety comes in. If you look at the word anxiety in the old text, in the biblical language, it means being distracted or being pulled apart, which is the opposite of God's peace. And this pulling apart creates stress in each of us. And that stress whether or not we acknowledge it, affects every part of our life. It affected me as a pastor, affected me as a husband, affected me as a Christ follower. Every area of my anxiety affected every part of my life. But like everything in our spiritual life, we have to be intentional. You know, there's an old English proverb that says, worry is like a rocking chair. It gives you something to do, but it doesn't get you anywhere. And that's what I keep on telling myself all those years in seminary and all those years leading up before 2023. I was in a rocking chair, worrying. But I was going nowhere in my life as a Christ follower. Because worry keeps us very, very busy. It stalls us. It stalls us in what God commands each of us to do. And Jesus says, you know what? If you want to be my disciple, don't worry. Don't worry so much that the life that I'm calling each of you to do. So that's what happens. As Christ followers, we need to stop controlling our life, controlling the life, and let God do it. But again, we forget, and I forgot for such a long time, because we lose sight of who we really belong to. Instead of resting in the Father's care, we let the same worries consume, just as those of us who don't have a relationship with God. So what is the cure? What is the cure for anxiety? Jesus makes it very clear that his followers must settle with the question of priorities. What is your priority as a Christ follower? We are called to live differently from those who don't know him. The world calls us to be comfortable, easy life, have security, have money, and countless other things. But Jesus says, as Christ followers, we need to be steeped in God reality, God's initiative, God's provisions. And this word steep is a command in the present tense. It's not a one-time choice. It's a daily, ongoing pursuit. Steep right now in God's reality, in God's initiative, in God's provisions. And steeping really means, in essence, submit to his control in our lives today. And you might be asking, Bill, how can we truly be not distracted by materialistic pursuits? Don't forget, we all have to work. We all have to dress. We all have to drive. We all have to pay taxes. These things take most of our days. You're living in a bubble. You're living in a greenhouse outside of the world. What are you talking about? We're not being materialistic, Bill. It's reality. We just have to live. What's the solution, Bill? Should we leave all and become monks living up in the mountains? There's no middle road, Bill. How do we do both? Steep our lives in God's quality, in God's reality, and still provide for our needs. What are we supposed to do? Change our perspective. Imagine you are at a buffet trying to juggle plates of food, not knowing what to eat first. You're at the beginning of the buffet, and you're in Las Vegas. Wow, so much choices. What do I do? So if you ever been to a Las Vegas buffet, you have to prioritize. You say, okay, this is what I'm going to eat. This is not what I'm going to eat. And God was saying to me, hey, the buffet is life. But I will guide you. I will hold the plate for you, and I will tell you what to go for. Don't go for the salads. Don't go for the bread. Don't go for the cheeses. That's why they put it in the front, so that your plate is so full, so by the time you hit the seafood, the meat, you have no room. But God says, forget that. Forget that. Come here. Forget those people. Let's go for the meat. Let's go for the seafood. So many options. I'll tell you what's important. What is your priority? But when we treat Jesus' words about seeking God's kingdom as something to fit in, this is God's part, this is my part. I've done the God part now. Now I live my part. We are still in control. God, I'll give you my share, then I'll take care of the rest. But no, God says, put me as a priority. I will tell you what to go for. Trust me. Steep your life in God reality, God's initiative, God's provisions. It's not about a schedule. It's about surrender. You're surrendering your life. But not surrender in a negative way. Surrender as a way to get something that God will bless you. Surrender. It means letting God take first place in your lives. And you've probably heard many sermons about this, but do you really live that way? And I got to a point in those 3 years, I said, you know what? I haven't been living in what you want, and I have to surrender. It means trusting that God knows what you need and His way is better, which is so difficult. His way is better. It's counterproductive. It's counterintuitive. So when we stop trying to control God, instead trusting Him, we find our family, our work, our friendships, even our worries are placed in His hands. And that's what His kingdom really becomes in each of our lives, in our hearts. So because God cares about our needs, God tells us not to worry about tomorrow. It's as if God recognizes that there will be worry in your lives, unavoidable worry today. But don't worry. Think about it. So much of what we worry about never happens. To be honest, my sabbatical was very interesting. When I hear about other pastors going sabbatical, they do this, they go on spiritual journeys, they come back refreshed. I'll tell you, to be honest, I came back very tired. What's the purpose of sabbatical? Sabbatical is basically you come back, you recharge so that you can really rock it for God. But I came back tired because I was still dealing with anxiety. There's so many things on my mind. What's going to happen to the children and youth ministries in my absence? What about the soccer camp? What about STEM? And the list went on and on and on and on. But I went back and I said, this is not working. This is not working. How can I have this mindset? So I said, you know what? I'm going to surrender. I need to stop wasting my time and energy because it could be used for better. And I came back to children youth ministry. It was okay. We had a great soccer camp. It was beyond expectations. God provided. And I want to stress, we had 50 campers. 40 of them were outside of the Pacific Grace family. That's great. What I did worry about? I could have enjoyed my sabbatical, but I was worried. Is it going to rain? What happens if the city kicks us off the field? What happens if the kids get injured? All these things, boom, 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 percolating in my head. We haven't started STEM, but I'm confident. We have enough volunteers. Everyone is excited. Everyone is getting ready for STEM, which starts next week. And you know what? And God revealed to me, Bill, if there were new troubles tomorrow, my fresh grace will help you. I will show up and I'll provide. Plans are fine, but don't make those plans so rigid that God doesn't need to show up. And we've heard many times, the difference between a good plan and a God plan is a God plan, God needs to show up for it to be successful. You have to trust. And you know what? Maybe the sermon says, hey, don't worry, I don't have anxiety. My life is great. Great. You know what? If your life is great, soak it up. But don't waste the good day if you're having and worry enters into that good day, because there will be probably bad days tomorrow. Now, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't plan ahead, but we have to understand worry is driven by fear. I had so much fear in things that I could not control, and it overwhelmed me. And it pulled away from me trusting God, and it interferes with my relationship with Him. So the question is, what would your week look like this coming week? Starting school, going back to work, starting your routine. If you stop trying to manage God's place in your life, instead trusting His lead. Maybe it means pausing before you rush into a decision, asking, Lord, what honors you in what I'm doing in your kingdom? And maybe it starts with just surrendering that fear about your kids, your health, and saying, Father, I trust that you care for what I cannot control. And that's something that I've been telling myself, and I finally was able to snap out of it. Interestingly, in those 2 years, I learned 2 important lessons in dealing with my anxiety and stop being a backseat driver. And I'm going to throw it out, and you might end up calling me Pastor Obvious. Pray as soon as you feel anxiety entering your heart. If you look at the book of Job, Job says a lot of terrible things to God. But at the end, God says to Job, you honor me. And tells all of Job's friends, you have angered me. And he says, Job better pray for you. Because Job has honored me and you have not. And you have to wonder why God would say that Job honored him after all these terrible things that Job has been saying to God. Why? Job was lamenting. Job was angry at God. At the end, God says, Job, you honored me. The simple reason, they were prayers. All of Job's interaction with God were prayers. Job was angry and he was complaining. But he was complaining angry to God. Everything that he was doing was towards God. And he never ran away from God. He was saying, God, I don't understand. I'm angry at you. But he never turned away. He never turned away. He stayed with God when he knew he could never get any out of it. Which means, at the end, Satan did not win. He was complaining, but there were still prayers. And sometimes we thinking prayers are beautiful. You know what? Genuine prayers are honest conversations. At the essence, prayer is honest conversations. It's okay to be angry at God. It's a relationship. A relationship cannot always be positive. There's always negative components. If it's a genuine relationship with God, sometimes you'll be angry at God. He was complaining, but they were still prayers. Psalm 88 is widely recognized as one of the most sorrowful psalms in the Bible. And it describes, it's a lament prayed by someone who's been ill for a long time. And the individual in the psalm feels friendless and is near death. And the psalm is very unique. It is unique because it does not end with a note of confidence or praise, but rather concludes in darkness. You have taken from me, friend and neighbor. Darkness is my closest friend. He says, darkness is my only friend. And despite this, the very act of the psalmist concluding in his prayer, he still has lingering hope for God. He's not praying what we think prayer should be. He's still praying. And he's still praying towards God. So don't wait until anxiety spirals. Turn in the prayer right away. And you know what? Over the last couple of years, it was very hard for me to write sermons. To be honest, it's very hard for me to write sermons because I was so emotionally tired from anxiety. Some days I would wake up and I'll look in the mirrors on a Sunday and look in the mirror, brush my teeth, and first thing on my mouth is, man, Bill, your sermon really sucks. Why would you even preach it? Hopefully this sermon doesn't suck. So let me know. If it does suck, let me know, okay? But I snapped out. It's still very hard, difficult. Because I got to the point where I'm saying, you're in control. If God has called me up to preach on a Sunday, He must have a plan. He must know that I can do it with His help. But I'm only talking about anxiety, but all the stuff I'm talking about, Psalm 88 and Job, also reflects to anything negative in our lives. When we grieve, when we're going through darkness in our lives, any aspect of darkness in our lives, first thing we do is pray. Again, you've heard many times people say, oh, just pray, just pray. Really, pray. And if you don't feel God there, but you hold on anyways, and you say, God, I don't understand. You are God and I'm not. Psalm 34, the Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves the crushed in spirit. Hold on to God. Another thing I had to learn, I had to write down one or two things that I can do today, and you know what? Leave the rest to God. I had to really physically write down, these are two things I can do today, and these I cannot do. God, take over. There are many things we cannot control our lives, which is why we need to constantly put them into God's hands. And this is what it hit me when I went into Costco. The shelves are stacked with everything you possibly want. Food, water, supplies lasting for a long time. It's tempting to think, if I can just stockpile enough, I won't have to be worried about tomorrow. And I don't know how many of you still have toilet paper since 2020. Actually, there was articles talking about some people who knew about Costco's grace-filled return policy were returning toilet paper in 2023. But Jesus doesn't promise us Costco-sized blessings for the future. He doesn't say, here's enough bread for the next 6 months so you won't have to trust me anymore. Instead, He promises daily bread, just enough for today. We want tomorrow's bread. We all want tomorrow's bread. And we want to see how God is going to take care of us next week, next month, next year. But Jesus doesn't promise Costco-style stockpiles. He promises fresh, daily provision, just like the man in the wilderness. Enough for today, not tomorrow. And the reason is very simple. Jesus doesn't just want to supply us. He wants us to trust him. And Jesus is inviting each of us to look at him today. Today's bread, today's strength, and today's grace. During the service at Casa Luz, I saw this slide and it brought me to tears. It reminded me of the yoke that I was carrying with my feeling of anxiety. Trying to get God to do my will. And in the last 3 years, God was telling me, you can find freedom in me. So the question this morning is, are you the person in the passenger seat on a long road trip wanting to hold the map, check the GPS, and telling the driver what lane to take or what lane God to take? Or do you trust him in the driver's seat? Do you keep worrying, second guessing, trying to grab the wheel? Or are you going to relax and trust that the driver, God, will get us to where we need to go? Jesus is reminding us, you're not the driver. Don't have to control the route or demand the timing. That's my Father's job. Your role, our role, is to sit in the passenger seat, trust, and keep your eyes open for the ways you can live for the kingdom. And when we dictate God's will, we're just leaning over, grabbing from the passenger seat. Grab the wheel, and the life will be much bumpier. Trust him, even when we don't even know where life is going. So let's live today with open hands. Let him, kingdom, speak first in your heart. And trust that tomorrow is already in his care. Gracious God, I want to give thanks for everything you provided. Sometimes we don't see it. Sometimes we don't experience it. Sometimes we don't want to see it, and we want to be in control. And Lord, I just pray that you will take the wheel because we trust you. We love you. And Lord, I just pray for those of us who are dealing with anxiety or worry, that you may take those worries away so that we can focus on you and calling each of us to serve how you want us to serve. We ask Son's most holy name, amen.